To my brilliant wife, may you finally rest from all that exhausting thinking. Damien's voice carried across the ballroom like silk wrapped around a blade. 70 pairs of eyes turned toward our table as crystal glasses rose in unison, catching the light from the chandeliers above. The Thornhill Country Club had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale for our 5th anniversary celebration. But the words my husband had just spoken felt more like a curse than a blessing. I forced my lips into what I hoped resembled a smile as our guests applauded. The board members of Ashford and Associates sat at the front tables, their expressions a mixture of concern and approval. Behind them, extended family from both sides filled the remaining seats. Along with business partners whose companies represented decades of my father's careful relationship building. 3 journalists from the business section had even been invited, their presence a detail I hadn't approved but couldn't question without raising suspicion. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted my champagne flute, the bubbles inside catching the light in a way that reminded me of tiny stars drowning in golden liquid. Damien leaned closer, his cologne sharp and expensive, a scent that had once made my heart race, but now only triggered a wave of nausea I'd learned to suppress. "You look pale, darling," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "Perhaps you should have rested more today instead of insisting on reviewing those tedious contract revisions." The comment landed with precision, reinforcing the narrative he'd been carefully constructing for 18 months. Vivienne Ashford, the overwhelmed CEO who couldn't handle the pressure of running her late father's architectural firm. The grieving daughter whose judgment had become questionable since tragedy struck. The wife whose loving husband worried constantly about her declining health and questionable decisions. Harold Sutton, the most senior member of our board, stood from his seat at the head table. His silver hair gleamed under the lights as he raised his glass higher. To Vivienne and Damien, may the next 5 years bring continued success and, most importantly, peace. Peace. The word echoed in my mind as I brought the champagne to my lips, but didn't drink. I'd learned that trick 3 weeks ago, after Dr. X. Cross had pulled me aside following yet another dizzy spell and suggested I document everything I consumed. The glass touched my mouth, my throat moved as if swallowing, but the liquid never passed my lips. Damien's hand found mine under the table, his fingers cold despite the warmth of the room. "I have an announcement," he said, standing with the easy confidence of someone who believed they'd already won. "Tomorrow morning, Vivienne will be signing some important documents to restructure the company's executive framework. It's time she focused on her health, while those of us who care about Ashford and Associates' future ensure its stability." The applause that followed felt like thunder in my ears. Board members nodded approvingly. My mother's sister dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, as if touched by my husband's apparent devotion. Even the journalists were scribbling notes, no doubt preparing headlines about the devoted spouse stepping up during his wife's time of need. What none of them knew was that 18 months ago, none of this had seemed remotely possible. My father's heart attack had come without warning on a Tuesday morning in March. One moment, he'd been reviewing blueprints for the Morrison Tower project. The next, he'd collapsed at his desk, gone before the paramedics could reach him. The funeral had been massive, befitting a man who'd spent 40 years building an architectural legacy that had shaped the city's skyline. Damien had been extraordinary during those first weeks. He'd handled phone calls when I couldn't speak, organized meal deliveries when I forgot to eat, held me through nights when grief felt like drowning. When the lawyers explained that I'd inherited controlling interest in Ashford and Associates, along with Dad's personal estate valued at close to $40 million, Damien had assured me he'd help manage the transition. "You shouldn't have to face this alone," he'd said, his arms around me as we stood in my father's empty office. "Let me handle the financial details while you focus on the creative vision. That's what you're brilliant at, Vivi. Leave the numbers to me." I'd agreed, grateful for the support, never imagining I was handing him the keys to my destruction. The symptoms had started subtly 6 months after the funeral, a slight dizziness after dinner that I attributed to exhaustion. difficulty concentrating during client presentations that seemed like normal grief fog, forgetting appointments I could have sworn I'd written down, losing track of conversations, struggling to recall details that should have been second nature. Damien's response had been perfect concern. Doctor's appointments were scheduled, specialists consulted. Everyone agreed I was under tremendous stress and needed to slow down, to delegate more, to trust others with the daily operations of the company my father had built. Your health has to come first, Damien would say, as he served dinner each evening, always cooking now since he'd temporarily left his financial consulting position to support me full-time. The company can survive without you for a few meetings. You can't lead if you're falling apart. The meals he prepared were always exquisite. Pan-seared salmon with herb crusts, coq au vin, that rivaled anything from Chef Laurent's professional kitchen, risottos that melted on the tongue. Damien had discovered a passion for cooking during his unemployment, or so he claimed. What I hadn't realized was that each carefully crafted dish contained something beyond expensive ingredients. Tonight's dinner service at the gala had been no exception. Before the toast, before the announcement that had set tomorrow's signing in motion, there had been a private dining room where Damien had insisted we share a quiet moment away from the crowds. Chef Laurent himself had prepared coq au vin, my father's favorite dish, a detail that should have touched me but instead felt like mockery. "You need to eat something substantial," Damien had urged, watching as I cut into the tender chicken. "You barely touch lunch, and tomorrow's going to be emotionally draining. The signing is necessary, Vivi, but I know it feels like letting go of your father's legacy." If you've ever felt dismissed by someone you trusted, hit like and subscribe, because what happens next will remind you why we never give up. I'd nodded, playing my role as the fragile wife grateful for her husband's guidance. But when Damien had excused himself to take a phone call, stepping just outside the dining room door, I'd acted on an instinct that had been building for weeks. The young server, who'd been hovering nearby, refilling water glasses, had a meal plate balanced on his service tray. In one smooth motion, born of desperation, I'd switched our plates, scraping my barely touched coq au vin onto his tray and taking his fresh serving. The switch had been clumsy, risky, but Damien had been too focused on his phone conversation to notice when he returned. I'd eaten slowly, buying time, while secretly transferring most of the food into a napkin hidden in my lap whenever his attention drifted. By the time we'd returned to the main ballroom for his toast, my stomach had been empty, but my mind had remained sharp. That clarity was everything. Now, as the applause for Damien's announcement finally died down and guests began moving toward the dance floor, I felt the weight of what came next pressing down on my chest. 30 minutes had passed since dinner. Under normal circumstances, the dizziness would be starting by now, that familiar fog creeping in at the edges of my consciousness. Instead, I felt every sensation with crystalline precision. The way Damien's thumb rubbed circles on the back of my hand, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt possessive. The slight tension in Harold Sutton's shoulders as he watched us from across the room. The knowing glance one of the journalists exchanged with her photographer. "I'm feeling a bit lightheaded," I said softly, pitching my voice just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "The excitement, I think." Damien's response was immediate, his face arranging itself into practiced concern. "Of course, darling. Let's get you some air. Harold, would you excuse us?" He guided me toward the ballroom's side exit, his hand firm on my elbow, in a way that probably looked supportive, but felt like control. We'd almost reached the door when I made my move. My knees buckled without warning, my full weight dropping as I let every muscle go slack. The champagne flute I'd been holding slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a crash that silenced the nearby conversations. "Vivi!" Damien's shout carried the perfect note of panic. "Someone call for help! She's collapsed!" Hands reached for me as I lay motionless, my cheek pressed against the cold marble. I kept my breathing shallow, my eyelids barely fluttering, as I fought every instinct screaming at me to move, to respond, to somehow escape what was coming next. Through my lashes, I could see the crowd gathering, concern etched on familiar faces. "Give her space," Damien commanded, his voice tight. "She needs air. Harold, please keep everyone back." Someone mentioned calling 911, but Damien was already pulling out his phone. "I'll handle it," he said firmly. "I know her doctors. This has happened before." The lie slid from his tongue with practiced ease, and I felt the first real stirring of rage cutting through my fear. This hadn't happened before, because there'd never been a before, when I hadn't consumed whatever he'd put in my food. Tonight was the first time I'd successfully avoided his carefully measured dose, and now I'd learn what happened when the performance went differently than planned. Footsteps moved away as Damien stepped toward the ballroom's entrance, presumably to make his emergency call. But his voice, when it came, was pitched low enough that only someone lying nearby could have heard it clearly. "She's out. Meet me at the estate office at 11 tonight. Bring the power of attorney forms. We need them signed before she has a chance to wake fully and start asking questions." The words hit like ice water, despite the warmth of the ballroom. Power of attorney. The legal mechanism that would give Damien complete control over my assets, my company, my father's legacy. The restructuring he'd announced wasn't about protecting Ashford and Associates. It was about stealing it. "Yes, the medication worked faster tonight," Damien continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I increased the dose slightly. She should be compliant for at least 6 hours, maybe 8. More than enough time to get everything executed properly. Medication, not food poisoning, not stress-induced illness, not the mysterious condition that had baffled 3 specialists. Medication that my husband had been deliberately, systematically feeding me for months while watching my health deteriorate and my grip on my father's company weaken. Paramedics arrived with impressive speed, which meant Damien had probably arranged for them to be standing by nearby. As they loaded me onto a stretcher, I maintained my limpness, my apparent unconsciousness. Damien climbed into the ambulance beside me, his hand finding mine, with what would have looked like desperate concern to the EMTs. "I'll be right here, sweetheart," he murmured, but his attention was on his phone as he typed rapidly. Through barely open eyes, I watched words appear on his screen. "She's secured. Laurent is already preparing the documents. This will be finished by morning." Laurent? The name sent another shock through my system. Not Chef Laurent, who'd worked for my family for 15 years. This had to be someone else, someone involved in whatever conspiracy Damien had constructed. The betrayal cut deeper with each revelation. But I forced myself to remain still, to gather information, to understand the full scope of what I was facing. The emergency room at Mercy General was quiet at this hour. Most of the staff focused on a multi-car accident that had come in an hour before. Dr. Amelia Cross, my family physician, met us at the entrance with a wheelchair and an expression that told me she'd been expecting this call. "Let's get her into a private examination room," she said crisply, her tone professional, but her eyes sharp as they met mine for just a fraction of a second. That look told me everything I needed to know. Dr. Cross was on my side. The examination was thorough and completely unnecessary, but it bought time. Damien paced outside the room while Dr. Cross ran through standard neurological checks, her movements efficient and practiced. When she leaned close to check my pupils, she whispered words so soft they were barely audible. "The blood work from last week confirmed it. Diazepam and scopolamine, both prescription sedatives. We need to get you somewhere safe." I couldn't respond, couldn't risk Damien noticing any change in my condition. But Dr. Cross saw the tiny movement of my fingers, the acknowledgement that I'd heard and understood. She straightened, calling out to the nurse in a voice pitched to carry through the door. "Vitals are stable, but I want to keep her for observation. Standard protocol for syncope episodes. We'll monitor overnight." Damien pushed into the room, his expression concerned, but his eyes cold as they swept over my prone form. "Is that really necessary? Couldn't I take her home? She'd rest better in her own bed." Hospital protocol? Mr. Ashford, Dr. Cross replied firmly. After a collapse like this, observation is mandatory. You're welcome to stay, of course. For a moment, I thought Damien might argue. His jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. But challenging a doctor's medical decision in front of witnesses would be out of character for the devoted husband role he'd crafted so carefully. Of course, he said, finally. Whatever's best for Vivian. Though I should probably return to the estate to handle some urgent matters. Will she be conscious soon? Dr. Cross checked her watch with deliberate slowness. Hard to say. These episodes can resolve quickly or take several hours. I'd suggest you handle whatever you need to and check back in the morning. The dismissal was clear, and after another moment of hesitation, Damien leaned down to press a kiss to my forehead. His lips were cold, his breath carrying a hint of mint and something chemical that made my stomach turn. Sleep well, darling, he whispered against my skin. Tomorrow's going to be a very important day. The door closed behind him, and I counted to 60 before opening my eyes fully. Dr. Cross was already pulling out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. We don't have much time, she said, without preamble. The toxicology report I ran last week was private, but I've sent copies to a colleague who specializes in abuse cases. What happened tonight? I sat up slowly, my muscles protesting after an hour of forced stillness. I switched my dinner plate. Didn't eat what Damien prepared. This is the first time in months my head has been this clear. Dr. Shea. Cross's expression turned grim. The levels in your system have been building. Another month at this rate, and you'd be looking at permanent cognitive damage, possibly organ failure. Vivian, what he's doing isn't just abuse. It's attempted murder. The words should have shocked me. But instead, they brought a strange clarity. Of course it was attempted murder. You didn't systematically poison someone you loved, didn't steal their agency and their company and their father's legacy, unless you were willing to destroy them. Completely. He's meeting someone at 11 tonight, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Someone named Laurent, though not our chef. They're bringing power of attorney documents. He said I'd be compliant for 6 to 8 hours. Dr. Cross pulled up her contacts, scrolling rapidly. I know a family law attorney who handles emergency protective orders, and we need to contact the police, get a detective involved who understands corporate fraud. But even as she spoke, I felt the weight of what I was facing settling over me like a net. Damien had been planning this for months, possibly since my father's death. He'd positioned himself perfectly, established a narrative of my declining health, gained the trust of board members and family alike. Any accusation I made would be filtered through that lens of the unstable, grief-stricken widow. I need proof, I said. Solid, undeniable evidence. Your toxicology report helps, but Damien will claim I was taking medication without his knowledge, that I'm confused. I need to catch him in the act, on record, with witnesses who can't be dismissed. Dr. Isame Cross studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You have a plan. It wasn't a question. The beginning of one. Can you discharge me in the next hour? Make it look like I insisted? That I was disoriented and demanding to go home? They'll expect you to be foggy, not fully conscious, Dr. Cross warned. If you show up clear-headed, Damien will know something's wrong. I thought about that, about the performance I'd have to give. The dizzy, compliant Vivienne that Damien expected. The wife who trusted her husband's guidance. The grieving daughter, too overwhelmed to see the trap closing around her. Then that's what I'll be, I said. Until the moment, I'm not. Dr. Cross arranged my discharge with the kind of bureaucratic efficiency that probably broke several protocols. The paperwork listed me as leaving against medical advice, a detail that would support Damien's narrative of my poor judgment. A nurse wheeled me to the main entrance where a taxi waited, arranged by Dr. Cross through a service that wouldn't connect back to any of my regular contacts. The drive to the Ashford estate took 20 minutes through dark streets that felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. The house my father had built stood at the end of a long private drive, its windows glowing with warm light that should have felt welcoming but instead seemed ominous. Damien's car sat in the circular drive, which meant he'd returned from the gala ahead of schedule. I paid the driver and walked to the front door on unsteady legs, letting myself stumble slightly on the front steps. The performance had to start now, before Damien saw me. Confusion, disorientation, the lingering effects of whatever medication he believed I'd consumed. The door opened before I could reach for the handle. Damien stood in the entrance, his expression cycling through surprise, concern, and something that might have been irritation before settling on devoted worry. "Vivian, what are you doing here? The hospital said you needed observation." I let my words slur slightly, blinking as if the light hurt my eyes. Wanted to come home, felt wrong there, need my own bed. His hands guided me inside, steering me toward the stairs. "Of course, darling. Let's get you upstairs. You should rest before tomorrow." But I pulled away from his grasp, moving instead toward my father's study, the room that had become my office after his death. Need to check something. Papers. Important papers. "Tomorrow," Damien said firmly, his hand on my elbow again. "Everything can wait until morning when you're feeling better." I ignored him, pushing open the study door. The room looked exactly as I'd left it that morning, neat and organized with client folders arranged by priority. The Morrison Tower blueprints spread across the main desk. Everything appeared normal until I noticed the small details that screamed of intrusion. The locked drawer where I kept sensitive financial documents stood slightly ajar. My laptop, which I always positioned at a precise angle to the desk corner, had been moved. Most damning, a thin folder I'd never seen before sat on the desk blotter, its manila surface pristine and official looking. I reached for it, my movements deliberately clumsy. The folder contained exactly what I'd feared and expected: transfer of shares agreements, restructuring documents, and there, clipped to the inside cover, power of attorney forms with my name typed across signature lines that remained blank. "What is this?" I asked, my voice carrying the right note of confusion. Damien moved closer, his presence behind me making my skin crawl. "Just some paperwork we need to review tomorrow. Nothing to worry about tonight. You're not well enough to focus on business matters." I turned to face him, clutching the folder with hands that trembled for real now. "These are company documents, transfer papers." "Damien, what is this?" His expression remained carefully concerned, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "We talked about this, Vivi. The board thinks it's best if I take on more responsibility while you focus on recovering. It's temporary, just until you're feeling better." Temporary. The word was a lie wrapped in reassurance, and I understood with sudden clarity that there would never be a moment when Damien deemed me better. The medication, the confusion, the declining health, all of it would continue until I was either completely incapacitated or dead. Those were the only endpoints to his plan. My phone was in my pocket, and I'd managed to activate the voice recorder before leaving the hospital. Every word of this conversation was being captured, but I needed more. I needed Damien to reveal the full scope of his scheme, preferably before whatever meeting he'd scheduled for later tonight. "I don't understand," I said, letting tears well in my eyes. Real tears, born of rage and fear and 18 months of accumulated grief. Dad left the company to me? He trusted me to carry on his legacy. Damien's arms came around me, and I had to force myself not to recoil. "Your father would want you taken care of first. The company can survive without you, Vivi. You're what matters most." The lies flowed so smoothly, coated in just enough truth to feel believable. Yes, my father would have wanted me taken care of, but he had also known I was capable of running Ashford and Associates, had groomed me for leadership since childhood. The idea that he'd want me sidelined, drugged into compliance while my husband stripped away everything I'd inherited, would have enraged him. I pulled away from Damien's embrace, moving toward the window that overlooked the estate gardens. In the reflection, I could see him watching me, his expression calculating behind the mask of concern. When do I sign? I asked quietly. Tomorrow morning. Jay Whitmore is coming by to witness the documents and make everything official. It's all very straightforward, just a formality, really. Jay Whitmore, estate attorney for the Ashford family for the past 15 years, a man my father had trusted implicitly. Another betrayal to add to the growing list. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text that I pulled out to check with fumbling fingers. Dr. Cross had sent a simple message. Samples secured. Attorney standing by. Be safe. Damien glanced at my screen, but the message had been carefully worded to reveal nothing. Who's texting at this hour? Dr. Cross, checking on me. I closed the message and looked at Damien with eyes that I made deliberately unfocused. I'm very tired. Think I need to sleep now. Relief flickered across his features, quickly hidden. Of course. Let me help you upstairs. He guided me to our bedroom, his hand solicitous as he helped me out of the gala dress and into nightclothes. The intimacy of it felt violating in a way I hadn't fully processed until now. This man had shared my bed while poisoning me, had held me while planning my destruction, had played the role of devoted husband while systematically stealing everything I'd inherited. Sleep well? He murmured, pulling the covers up around my shoulders. I have some work to handle in the study, but I'll be up soon. The moment the door closed behind him, I counted to 100, then pulled out my phone. The voice recording was still running, capturing the ambient sounds of the house. Damien's footsteps moved down the hallway, heading back toward the study. I heard the distinctive click of the door, locking, followed by the murmur of his voice as he made a phone call. Moving silently, I slipped from the bed and crept to the top of the stairs. The study door was closed, but sound carried through the old house in unpredictable ways. If I positioned myself near the heating vent at the end of the upstairs hallway, I might be able to hear more of Damien's conversation. Everything's on schedule. His voice drifted up through the vent, tinny but audible. She's upstairs sleeping off the dose. Tomorrow morning, Whitmore will arrive at 9, we'll get the signatures, and by noon, Ashford and Associates will be under new management. A pause as whoever he was speaking with responded. The board won't question it. I've spent 18 months establishing her declining mental state. Harold Sutton himself commented tonight on how concerning her health has become. When I present them with properly executed power of attorney documents, they'll be relieved someone competent is taking control. Competent. The word dripped with contempt, and I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle the sound that wanted to escape. Celeste has been invaluable, Damien continued, having her inside perspective on Vivienne's daily schedule, her client meetings, her decision-making process, has made this entire operation seamless. Once the transfer is complete, she'll receive her promised position as CFO, a fitting reward for 18 months of intelligence gathering. Celeste, my executive assistant, the woman I'd promoted myself, who I'd trusted with calendar access, client files, sensitive company information, the person who'd been by my side through every dizzy spell, every forgotten meeting, every moment of confusion. She'd known. She'd been part of this from the beginning. The betrayal cut deeper than Damien's, somehow. My husband had married me with calculation, but Celeste had built friendship while plotting destruction. No, there's no risk of her contesting anything, Damien said into the phone. By the time the medication fully clears her system, the documents will be legally binding. And if she tries to fight it, well, we have 18 months of documented mental decline to present. Every board member, every doctor, every family member who's witnessed her deterioration will testify to her current incapacity. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. This wasn't just theft. It was character assassination, planned and executed with surgical precision. The offshore accounts are already established, Damien continued. Once I have full control, I'll begin moving assets gradually. Nothing dramatic enough to raise flags, but within 6 months, most of the liquid assets will be safely transferred. The company itself will be more complicated, but Once we start restructuring, selling off divisions, it will look like smart business decisions rather than asset stripping. 6 months. In Damien's timeline, I had 6 months before Ashford and Associates would be gutted, my father's 40-year legacy dismantled and sold off in pieces, while I watched helplessly, drugged into compliance or institutionalized if I fought back, not if I could help it. I retreated to the bedroom and pulled out the laptop I kept hidden in my closet, a secondary device that Damien didn't know existed. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I composed an email to Harold Sutton, carefully worded to reveal just enough without sounding hysterical. But before I could hit send, my bedroom door opened. Damien stood in the doorway, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharp as they took in the laptop. My alert posture, the phone still recording in my hand. "Having trouble sleeping?" he asked, his tone conversational. I fumbled with the laptop, trying to look startled and disoriented. "Couldn't rest? Thought I'd review tomorrow's documents. Want to be prepared?" He crossed the room in 3 strides, taking the laptop from my hands with gentle firmness. "Tomorrow. You need to rest now, Vivi." "Let me help you." From his pocket, he pulled a small pill bottle. "Dr. Cross prescribed these for anxiety. They'll help you sleep." The pills rattled as he shook 2 into his palm, extending them toward me with a glass of water he'd brought from the bathroom. In that moment, I understood that Damien knew. Maybe not the full extent of my awareness, but enough to recognize that I was more alert than I should be, that the medication hadn't taken full effect. "I don't want pills," I said, pushing his hand away. "Just want to sleep naturally." His expression hardened slightly. The doctor insisted, "For your own good, Vivienne." We stared at each other, the pretense of devoted concern finally cracking. In his eyes, I saw calculation, determination, and something darker. The willingness to do whatever it took to ensure his plan succeeded. "Take the pills," he repeated, his voice losing its gentle tone. "Or I'll call Dr. Cross and tell her you're being combative. We can have you committed for a 72-hour psychiatric hold if necessary. Is that really what you want?" The threat hung in the air between us, crystal clear. Comply or be forcibly removed from my own home, from any ability to fight back. By the time a psychiatric hold ended, the documents would be signed, the company transferred, the trap completely closed. My hand shook as I reached for the pills, my mind racing through options. If I took them, I'd be truly helpless. If I refused, Damien would escalate, and I wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. I needed more time, more evidence, more allies in position. The pills touched my tongue, bitter and chemical. I took the water glass, brought it to my lips, and in the split second, when Damien's attention shifted to close the laptop, I palmed the pills and swallowed only water. "Good girl," he said, his voice returning to gentle concern. "Now lie down. Tomorrow will be easier if you're well rested." I lay back against the pillows, closing my eyes as if the medication was already taking effect. Damien's hand smoothed hair back from my forehead, a gesture that once would have comforted me, but now felt like a violation. "Sleep well," he whispered. "By tomorrow night, all of this will be over." The door closed, the lock clicking into place from the outside. I waited until his footsteps faded, then spit the pills into my hand. They left a residue that tasted like poison, which perhaps they were. My phone showed it was nearly 10 p.m. In 1 hour, Damien's meeting was scheduled. 1 hour to figure out how to turn the trap he'd laid back on him. I pulled up my text thread with Dr. Cross and typed rapidly. "In immediate danger. Damien knows I'm too alert. Tried to force medication. Need help now." Her response came within seconds. "Police won't act without evidence of immediate threat. But attorney says if you can record tomorrow's signing attempt, that plus toxicology report might be enough for emergency intervention. Can you last until morning?" Could I? With Damien increasingly suspicious, with Celeste positioned to report my every move, with an attorney arriving at 9 a.m. to witness my signature on documents that would destroy everything. A new text appeared, this one from an unknown number. "This is Rita Delgado, corporate fraud investigator. Dr. Cross gave me your case. If your husband is embezzling, I need paper trail evidence, bank statements, transfer records, anything showing unauthorized movement of company funds." Company funds, the offshore accounts Damien had mentioned. If he'd already begun transferring money, there would be records. Digital footprints that even the most careful criminal couldn't completely erase. I opened my laptop and accessed the secure portal for Ashford and Associates financial accounts. The passwords should have been changed months ago as standard security protocol, but Damien had convinced me that wasn't necessary, that maintaining current access was more efficient. Now, I understood why. The account activity loaded slowly, and what I saw made my blood turn cold. Transfers dating back 6 months, each for amounts just under the threshold that would trigger automatic bank reviews. 10,000 here, 15,000 there. Amounts that could be explained as legitimate business expenses if questioned. But there were dozens of them, hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing out of Ashford and Associates and into accounts I didn't recognize. I screenshot everything, my hand steady despite the rage building in my chest. A sound from downstairs made me freeze. Voices, multiple ones. Damien hadn't waited until 11. The meeting was happening now. I crept to the bedroom door and pressed my ear against the wood. 3 distinct voices drifted up from the study below. Damien, a man I didn't recognize, and Celeste. "The documents need to be signed by 9 a.m., the unfamiliar voice said. That had to be Jay Whitmore, the family attorney. "I've scheduled a notary to arrive at 8:45. Once we have Vivian's signature, I can file the power of attorney with the court by noon." "She'll sign," Damien said confidently. "She's sufficiently medicated and has been for months. There's no risk of resistance." Celeste's voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. "And my position as CFO is guaranteed. I've provided intelligence for 18 months. If I'm not compensated as promised, I'll have no choice but to report what I know to the board." "You'll get exactly what you deserve," Damien replied, and something in his tone made me wonder if Celeste understood the double meaning there. The conversation continued, detailing the steps of tomorrow's plan with the precision of a military operation. I recorded every word, knowing it might be the only evidence that could save me. At 11:30, Celeste and Whitmore finally left. I heard Damien lock the front door, then climb the stairs. His footsteps paused outside the bedroom, and I held my breath, wondering if he'd check on me again. The handle turned slowly. I forced my breathing into the deep, regular rhythm of sleep, the pills I'd palmed now hidden under my mattress. Damien stood in the doorway for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then the door closed, and I heard him walk to the guest room down the hall. He wasn't even pretending to share a bed with me anymore. The mask was coming off, piece by piece. I lay in the darkness, my mind racing. Tomorrow morning, if Damien's plan worked, I would sign away everything. But I had evidence now. Recordings of his phone calls, screenshots of unauthorized transfers, Dr. Cross's toxicology report, and testimony from multiple sources. The question was whether it would be enough, and whether I could survive long enough to use it. At 3 a.m., I finally allowed myself to sleep, the phone still recording, positioned where it would capture any sound from the hallway. If Damien tried anything during the night, I'd have proof. When I woke, early morning light was filtering through the curtains. My phone showed 47 text messages, all from numbers I didn't recognize. I opened the first one. "Ms. Ashford, this is Harold Sutton. I received a concerning email last night that appeared to be from you, but incomplete. Are you all right?" My heart sank. The email I tried to send before Damien interrupted had somehow gone through, but corrupted, showing only fragments that probably made me look exactly as unstable as Damien had claimed. The rest of the messages were similar. Board members checking on me, expressing concern about my state of mind, suggesting I should take time off for my health. Every message reinforced the narrative Damien had built so carefully. Footsteps in the hallway announced his approach. I barely had time to hide my phone before Damien entered, carrying a breakfast tray. Coffee, toast, and what I now recognized as my daily dose of poison, disguised as a health smoothie. "Good morning, darling," he said cheerfully. "Big day today. I thought you might need some energy. Drink this before we meet with Whitmore." The smoothie sat on the tray, innocent and deadly. I was supposed to drink it, supposed to become the compliant, confused version of myself that would sign without question. Instead, I looked Damien in the eye and said the words that would change everything. "I'm not drinking anything you give me. And I'm not signing those documents." His expression froze, concern melting into something cold and calculating. "I don't think you understand the situation you're in, Vivienne." "I understand perfectly. You've been drugging me for 18 months, stealing from my company, planning to strip my father's legacy and sell it off in pieces. I have recordings of every conversation, bank records showing unauthorized transfers, and toxicology reports proving what you've been doing." For a long moment, Damien said nothing. Then he smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen. "You have nothing that will hold up in court. Nothing that isn't filtered through the lens of your documented mental instability. Even if you try to fight this, Vivienne, you'll lose. I've made sure of that." He moved toward the bed. And I scrambled backward, my phone in my hand, with 911 already dialed, but not yet connected. "Here's what's going to happen," Damien said softly. "You're going to get dressed. You're going to come downstairs. And you're going to sign those documents like the good, obedient wife you've been for the past 18 months. Because if you don't, if you make this difficult, I will have you committed. I will testify that you've become a danger to yourself. And I will ensure that you never see the outside of an institution again." The threat was clear, and I believed every word. Damien had built his trap too well, anticipated too many of my moves. Even with evidence, even with allies, I was still positioned as the unstable, unreliable narrator of my own life. Unless I could change the narrative completely. "All right," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll sign. Just, please, give me a moment to get ready." Damien's smile widened. "That's my girl. Whitmore will be here in 30 minutes. Don't keep us waiting." He left the room, and I heard him whistling as he descended the stairs. Victorious, confident, certain he'd won. I dressed quickly, my hands steadier than they'd been in months. Then I pulled out my phone and sent 3 text messages. To Dr. Cross: "It's happening now. I need you here immediately." To Harold Sutton: "Emergency at my estate. Please come now. Bring as many board members as you can." To Rita Delgado: "Corporate fraud in progress. Need witness. Now." Then I went downstairs to face whatever came next, knowing that the next hour would determine whether I reclaimed my life or lost it completely. Damien stood in the study with Whitmore and Celeste, the documents spread across my father's desk like a death sentence. All 3 turned as I entered, their expressions ranging from confident, Damien, to nervous, Celeste, to coldly professional, Whitmore. "Good morning, Vivienne," Whitmore said formally. "I understand you're here to execute some important documents today." I moved toward the desk, my eyes on the power of attorney forms. Before I sign anything, I need to understand exactly what I'm agreeing to. Damien's hand found my shoulder, his grip firm. "We've been through this, darling. It's just a temporary measure to help manage the company while you focus on your health." "Temporary?" I repeated. "And how long is temporary?" Whitmore cleared his throat. "The power of attorney can be revoked at any time, provided you're deemed mentally competent to make such a decision." Deemed by whom? Damien. The doctors he'd been feeding false information to for months. The board members who'd watched me deteriorate under his careful poisoning. The trap was perfect. Even as I stood there, knowing the truth, I had no clear path to escape it. I need time to think, I said, stepping away from the desk. Damien's grip on my shoulder tightened. We don't have time. The notary arrives in 5 minutes. This needs to be completed today, Vivian. Why today? Why this moment? What's the rush if it's really about helping me? My questions hung in the air, and I saw something flicker in Celeste's expression. Doubt, maybe. Or guilt. She glanced at Damien, then away. Because the board meeting is tomorrow, Damien said smoothly. And they need to see that proper arrangements have been made. Surely you don't want to disappoint Harold and the others? The doorbell rang, shattering the tension. Whitmore moved toward the foyer. That will be the notary. But when the door opened, it wasn't a notary standing on our front step. It was Harold Sutton, followed by 3 other board members, Dr. Cross, and a woman in a sharp business suit who could only be Rita Delgado. Damien's confident expression cracked, just slightly. What's going on? I looked him in the eye and felt something inside me settle into absolute certainty. What's going on is that you underestimated me. You thought I was too drugged, too broken, too confused to fight back. You were wrong. Harold stepped into the study, his eyes taking in the scene. The documents spread across the desk. Whitmore's surprised expression, Celeste's pale face. Vivian sent me a rather concerning message last night, Harold said quietly. Something about unauthorized document signing and suspicious transfers. I thought it best to investigate personally. Has Vivian lost everything, or is this her most dangerous move yet? Drop a comment below. Do you think she has one last card to play, or is Damien's plan unstoppable? Damien recovered quickly, his mask of concerned husband sliding back into place. Harold, thank you for coming. But this is really a private matter. Vivian hasn't been well lately, as you know. She's been sending confused messages to several people. I've been trying to protect her privacy while handling the situation. Protect my privacy, I echoed. Is that what you call it, Harold? I need to show you something. I pulled out my phone, connected it to the study's presentation screen, and hit play on the recording from last night. Damien's voice filled the room, crystal clear. Once I have full control, I'll begin moving assets gradually. Within 6 months, most of the liquid assets will be safely transferred. The color drained from Damien's face as his own words played back, damning and undeniable. But before anyone could react, Celeste stepped forward, her hand shaking as she placed a small recording device on the desk. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice breaking. Something I should have said 18 months ago. Celeste's hands trembled as she placed the recording device on the desk, her eyes avoiding Damien's burning glare. The small digital recorder looked insignificant against the spread of legal documents, but the weight of what it represented hung heavy in the suddenly silent study. I started recording 3 months ago, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. After I found the emails. Damien moved toward her with frightening speed, but Harold stepped between them, his 62 years carrying an authority that stopped my husband cold. Let her speak. Celeste drew a shaky breath, her composure cracking with each word. Damien promised me CFO position once Vivienne was out of the way. He said we'd run Ashford and Associates together, that he'd leave his wife and we'd build something better than her father ever could. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. The confession hit like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain still. To let her continue. This was her redemption, however late it came. But then I accessed his email account last month, Celeste continued, pulling a USB drive from her pocket, looking for details about the restructuring timeline. Instead, I found correspondence with Whitmore discussing how to, and I quote, eliminate loose ends after probate cleared. She looked at me for the first time, tears streaming down her face. I was a loose end, Vivian, just like you. He was going to stage our deaths after he had full control of the company, make it look like I'd helped you commit suicide due to your mental breakdown, then killed myself from guilt. The room erupted in shocked voices, but I could only focus on Damien's expression. The mask had finally shattered completely, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. This was the man who'd been sleeping beside me, who'd held me through grief, who'd systematically destroyed my life while planning my murder. "This is ridiculous," Damien said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "She's clearly been influenced by Vivian's paranoid delusions. This is exactly the kind of mental instability I've been trying to protect everyone from." But Celeste was already plugging the USB drive into my father's computer, pulling up files that made Whitmore visibly pale. Email chains detailing not just the poisoning and theft, but contingency plans for disposing of bodies. Faked suicide notes already drafted. Even research into untraceable poisons that could mimic natural heart attacks. "He's been planning this since before your father died," Celeste said, her voice growing stronger. "I found purchase orders for the medication dated 2 weeks before the heart attack. Damien was already preparing. The implication hung in the air like poison. My father's sudden heart attack, the one that had come without warning despite perfect health at his last physical. The one that had conveniently left me vulnerable, grieving, and inheriting $40 million with a husband positioned to take advantage. "You killed him," I said, the words coming from somewhere deep and cold. "You killed my father." Damien's laugh was sharp and ugly. "Prove it." "You can't." "The cremation you insisted on made sure of that. Even if I had, which I'm not admitting, you'll never be able to demonstrate anything beyond paranoid speculation from a mentally unstable woman." Rita Delgado stepped forward, her badge already in hand. "Actually, Mr. Ashford, we can prove quite a bit. The SEC has been investigating Ashford and Associates for 3 months following an anonymous tip about wire fraud. Your digital footprint is extensive and sloppy." She pulled out a tablet, scrolling through screens of bank transfers, offshore accounts, and what appeared to be surveillance footage. "We have documentation of 4.7 million in unauthorized transfers, falsified board meeting minutes, forged signatures on 23 different documents, and communications with 3 other conspirators beyond Mr. Whitmore here." Damien's face had gone ashen, but Whitmore finally found his voice. "These recordings were obtained illegally, without consent, without warrants. None of this will hold up in court, and Ms. Ashford has been under psychiatric care, making her testimony unreliable at best." The attorney's words carried weight, and I felt the familiar grip of helplessness closing around my throat. Even with all this evidence, even with witnesses, Damien had built his narrative too carefully. The unstable widow, the concerned husband, the tragic necessity of intervention. But then Dr. Cross spoke up, her medical authority cutting through the legal maneuvering. "About that psychiatric care, I've been Ms. Ashford's physician for 12 years. She's never been prescribed medication for mental health issues. The toxicology report I ran 2 weeks ago, however, showed sustained levels of diazepam and scopolamine, both sedatives that would produce exactly the symptoms Mr. Ashford has been attributing to mental illness." She placed a folder on the desk. Official hospital letterhead, visible on every page. This report was filed with the state medical board as a suspected case of spousal poisoning. The levels in Vivian's system were building toward toxic, potentially fatal ranges. Another month, and we'd be looking at permanent organ damage or death. Harold picked up the toxicology report, his expression darkening as he read. The other board members crowded around, their shock palpable. These were people who'd known me since childhood, who'd worked with my father for decades. Watching them realize the extent of Damien's deception felt like vindication and violation in equal measure. "There's one more thing," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I pulled out my own folder, the prenuptial agreement Damien and I had signed 5 years ago. Our prenup, specifically, Clause 8. Damien's eyes widened, genuine fear flickering across his features for the first time. "Vivian, don't." But I was already reading aloud, my voice carrying to every corner of the study. In the event that either party attempts to claim mental incapacity of the other for purposes of financial gain, all marital rights are immediately void, and the accusing party forfeits any claim to shared assets. Additionally, if such incapacity is proven to be induced through medication, poisoning, or other deliberate means, it constitutes fraud and triggers immediate criminal investigation, with all evidence being admissible, regardless of how obtained. The clause had been my father's idea, inserted at his insistence over Damien's objections. At the time, I'd thought it was paranoid overprotection. Now I understood it was my father's final gift, a safeguard against exactly this scenario. That clause, I continued, looking directly at Damien, means everything you've tried to dismiss as inadmissible evidence becomes not just admissible, but required for criminal prosecution. The recordings, the toxicology reports, the financial documentation, all of it. You activated the very mechanism that will destroy you. Whitmore was frantically scrolling through his copy of the prenup, his face growing paler with each line. This clause is unusual, but it appears legally binding. If Miss Ashford can demonstrate induced incapacity, then Mr. Ashford has no legal standing to contest the evidence or claim any marital assets. And I can demonstrate it, I said. Dr. Cross's toxicology report, combined with purchase records of the medication on Damien's credit card, along with 18 months of his recorded conversations discussing the poisoning, constitute proof beyond any reasonable doubt. Damien lunged toward me, his composure finally shattering completely. You manipulative witch. You planned this. You've been playing me this whole time. Harold and one of the other board members grabbed Damien's arms, restraining him before he could reach me. Rita Delgado was already on her phone, calling for backup. No, I said quietly. I didn't plan this. I survived it. There's a difference. The study descended into controlled chaos. Rita read Damien his rights, while two officers who'd been waiting outside entered to place him in handcuffs. Whitmore was attempting to negotiate some kind of deal, but Rita shut him down with professional efficiency. Mr. Whitmore, you're also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and obstruction of justice. Anything you say can and will be used against you. As both men were led toward the front door, Damien turned back one last time. You'll never survive without me. That company will crumble. Everyone will see you're not capable of leading it. The threat was hollow now, stripped of power, but I answered it anyway. Watch me rebuild what you tried to burn. After the police cars pulled away, Harold gathered the board members in the study. The emergency meeting was impromptu and probably violated a dozen procedural protocols, but none of that mattered in the face of what we'd just witnessed. I move that we convene an emergency board session at the Thornhill Country Club, Harold said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of corporate leadership. The ballroom is still set up from last night's gala, and we need witnesses beyond this room. Vivian, can you arrange for the remaining guests from yesterday to return? I pulled out my phone, my hands steadier than they'd been in 18 months. Most of them never left. The shock of my collapse meant many stayed overnight at the club's hotel. I can have them assembled within the hour. 45 minutes later, I stood in the same ballroom where Damien had made his poisonous toast. But everything had changed. 52 people filled the chairs that had been hastily arranged in rows, facing a makeshift podium. Board members, family members, business partners, and the 3 journalists who'd been covering our anniversary celebration. The irony wasn't lost on me. Damien had wanted public validation of his takeover. Instead, he'd get public exposure of his crimes. Harold called the emergency meeting to order, his voice grave. We're here to address serious allegations of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy that have come to light regarding Damien Ashford's conduct over the past 18 months. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. I stepped to the podium, connected my phone to the sound system, and let the recordings speak for themselves. Damien's voice filled the ballroom, crystal clear and damning. Once I have full control, I'll begin moving assets gradually. Within 6 months, most of the liquid assets will be safely transferred. The company itself will be more complicated. But once we start restructuring, selling off divisions, it will look like smart business decisions rather than asset stripping. Gasps echoed through the space as the full scope of the plan became clear. I played 3 more recordings, each one revealing another layer of the conspiracy. Then, I displayed the financial records on the large presentation screen, showing the $4.7 million in unauthorized transfers. My husband spent 18 months poisoning me, stealing from this company, and planning to murder both me and his accomplice once he'd secured full control. I said, my voice steady, despite the emotion threatening to choke me. He did this with the help of our family attorney and my executive assistant, both of whom are now in custody. One of the business partners stood, his face flushed with anger. How do we know this isn't some kind of setup? Recordings can be faked. Evidence can be manufactured. Before I could respond, Dr. Cross stood from her seat near the back. I can verify that Ms. Ashford has been systematically poisoned with prescription sedatives for at least 6 months, possibly longer. The toxicology report I filed with the state medical board is a matter of public record now. The medication levels in her system were approaching fatal ranges. The journalist from the business section raised her hand. Ms. Ashford, are you claiming your husband attempted to murder you? I'm not claiming anything, I replied. I'm presenting documented evidence of attempted murder, corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The SEC is conducting a full investigation, and criminal charges have been filed. As if summoned by the mention, Rita Delgado entered through the ballroom's main doors, flanked by 2 more officers. The murmur of conversation died instantly. Ms. Ashford, thank you for assembling everyone, Rita said, moving to stand beside the podium. For those who don't know me, I'm Rita Delgado, Senior Investigator with the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm here to inform you that Damian Ashford and Jay Whitmore have been formally charged with wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple counts of securities violations. She pulled out an official document, holding it up for everyone to see. Additionally, Judge Patricia Hendricks has issued an immediate restraining order prohibiting Mr. Ashford from accessing any Ashford & Associates assets, properties, or personnel. Pending criminal trial, all company accounts associated with his access have been frozen, and forensic accountants are currently working to trace and recover the stolen funds. Harold stood, his expression grim but satisfied. In light of these circumstances, I move that the board vote to permanently remove Damian Ashford from any and all positions of authority within Ashford & Associates, and to restore Vivienne Ashford as sole CEO with full authority to restructure executive positions as she sees fit. The vote was unanimous. 11 board members, all of whom had watched me grow up, all of whom had loved my father, voted to protect what he'd built. The sound of their affirmations felt like absolution. But Rita wasn't finished. There's one more thing. Our investigation has uncovered evidence that Mr. Ashford may have been involved in the death of Richard Ashford 18 months ago. We're petitioning the court for an exhumation order to conduct a full toxicology examination. The room went completely silent. My father's death, which had seemed tragic but natural, might have been the opening move in Damian's plan. The violation of it, the calculated cruelty, hit me harder than anything else that had happened. If the examination confirms poisoning, Rita continued, Mr. Ashford will face additional charges of first-degree murder. The journalists were typing frantically on their phones. By tomorrow morning, this story would be everywhere. The headlines writing themselves in real time. Devoted husband exposed as murderer and thief. Architectural legacy nearly destroyed by internal conspiracy. CEO survives systematic poisoning to reclaim her company. As the meeting concluded and people began filing out, many stopped to speak with me. Apologies for not seeing what was happening, offers of support, promises to help rebuild what Damian had tried to destroy. Each conversation felt surreal, like I was watching my life from outside my body. Celeste approached last, her eyes red from crying. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I enabled him, participated in your destruction, even if I eventually tried to stop it. But if there's anything I can do to help repair the damage, anything at all, please let me. I looked at her for a long moment, weighing justice against mercy, anger against understanding. You'll testify. At his trial, at Whitmore's trial, you'll tell everything you know. And then you'll spend the next year working with the SEC to help trace every dollar Damien stole and every person he corrupted. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. I'll do whatever it takes. 6 months later, I stood in my father's office at Ashford and Associates, which was once again truly mine. The Morrison Tower project had been completed ahead of schedule, earning the company recognition from the American Institute of Architects. A $60 million international contract sat on my desk, signed that morning with clients who specifically wanted to work with a firm that had demonstrated integrity under fire. The publicity around Damien's trial had been intense, but it had also attracted attention from organizations that valued ethical leadership. 3 major corporations had reached out with projects, citing my handling of the crisis as proof of the kind of partner they wanted. Damien had been sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The attempted murder charges were still pending, along with the investigation into my father's death. Whitmore received 6 years for his role in the conspiracy. Celeste had been granted immunity in exchange for her testimony, and, true to her word, she'd helped recover $3.2 million of the stolen funds. I'd promoted her to vice president of operations, a decision that had surprised many but felt right to me. She'd earned her redemption through months of painstaking work, helping untangle every thread of Damien's web. More importantly, she'd proven that people could change, could choose differently when given a second chance. Chef Laurent had cried when I'd asked him to cater the celebration dinner after the international contract signing. Harold Sutton had toasted my father's memory with words that brought tears to my eyes. Dr. Cross had hugged me tight, whispering that she was proud of how far I'd come. My assistant knocked on the office door, carrying a fresh cup of coffee. The new assistant, carefully vetted and recommended by Rita Delgado herself. Ms. Ashford, you have a call on line 2. Someone from the district attorney's office. I picked up the phone, expecting an update about the ongoing investigations. Instead, the voice on the other end made my blood run cold. Ms. Ashford, this is Assistant District Attorney Morrison. We need to discuss some new evidence that's come to light regarding your husband's case. It appears there were additional conspirators we weren't aware of, people still within your industry who may have been involved in the original plan. My hand tightened on the phone. What kind of additional conspirators? That's what we need to determine. But based on communications we've uncovered, it seems Damien was working with a network of individuals who specialize in corporate takeovers through spousal manipulation. You may not have been his first target, Ms. Ashford, and given that several of his alleged partners are still at large, you might not be his last. After the call ended, I sat in silence, watching the city lights begin to glow as evening fell. My email pinged, a message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, Ashford case. New evidence of additional conspirators. I opened it slowly, my heart pounding. Ms. Ashford, we've uncovered communications suggesting Mr. Ashford was not working alone. There may be others within your industry who target successful women for asset theft. We need to meet to discuss protection protocols and your cooperation with a broader investigation. This may be larger than anyone initially realized. I stared at the screen, processing the implications. Damien hadn't been a lone predator. He'd been part of something bigger, more organized, more dangerous. And now that he was in prison, what would stop his associates from targeting other women, other companies, other legacies built by people who deserved better? My phone buzzed with a text from Rita Delgado. Got the DA's message? We need to talk. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., my office. Bring everything you have? This isn't over, Vivian. It's just beginning. I looked around my father's office, at the blueprints on the walls, the awards for architectural excellence, the photos of buildings that would stand for generations. Damien had tried to take all of this, to destroy what my father had built and profit from the rubble. He'd failed. But if there were others out there, if there was a network of people doing to other women what had been done to me, then my fight wasn't finished. I pulled up my contacts and started making calls. Harold Sutton, Dr. Cross, Rita Delgado, and a list of other women CEOs I'd met through business conferences and industry events. If there was a network of predators targeting successful women, then we'd build a network of survivors to stop them. Damien had taught me something valuable in his attempt to destroy me. He taught me that survival wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to fight back, not just for yourself, but for everyone who came after you. I looked at the email one more time, then hit reply. I'll be there, and I'm bringing others. If this is bigger than Damien, then our response needs to be bigger too. Let's end this. I pressed send and smiled, feeling something fierce and determined settle in my chest. Damien had wanted me to rest from all that exhausting thinking. Instead, he'd awakened something far more dangerous. A woman who refused to be a victim. A CEO who'd protect her legacy. A daughter who'd honor her father's memory by ensuring no one else suffered what I'd survived. The city lights glowed brighter as night fell completely, and somewhere out there, other women were fighting their own battles, facing their own Damiens. But they weren't alone anymore, and neither was I.